Now in the C file, I try to show something with rendering with colored lights and not just any color. I'm rendering with red, green, and blue lights. And so we can see here from the, this is difficult view. So the rim light is blue, so red, green, and blue. The key light is red, and the fill light over here is green. And so we can see a little bit of green on the ground. We're seeing blue from the back, hitting the back of this fellow, and we see the red light from the key. And as they blend, they're also overlapping. Now this light has a fall off to it, and so I darken the background on this so the background gradation color is darker. But I also made a fall off, and so I'm using physically correct fall off, and I had to increase the light intensity. So if we open up the Houdini file for that, uh, and I look at my light intensity is set to 10, and my attenuation option is set to physically correct. And so these lights are all set to the same intensity. And I did that to just show the evenness of the light on the subject. Uh, and I haven't really talked about what's in the Houdini file yet, so let me talk a little bit about here. So I made these lights. These lights, this is true for the earlier examples. I assigned a color to the earlier ones. I assigned them a white color, and I told it to be a grid. And then I built a light box around the objects, and so these will get rendered to block the light. But if I look at one of these, you can see there's the light in there, and then the light box does help cast a shadow. So make sure that the light doesn't go somewhere where it isn't. More like a real studio light would. And so even some slight variations where the light is actually set back in that box a little bit. If the light were to go all the way up to the front, or the light shape were like a half dome, or a little bit less than a half dome, like an umbrella, you'd get a different effect. And so that's the lighting setup that I got there. But this is to show the different color directions. So let me, if I go back to my render here, and let's go to the portrait. Now the cool thing about this is that if I look at the red, I can see that this is the effect of the key light only. And this model, I got this, I downloaded this character, uh, paid for it from Turbo Squid, and his name is Lewis, and I use this for my MFA project to kind of represent what I looked like back in 1991, 30 some years ago. And when I had my fading blonde hair and my beard. But anyway, so we can see this is the effect of the red light. And in the green light, I look at just the green channel. This is the fill. And so to see the fill isn't adding a lot of extra shadow into the face. It's basically canceling the shadow from the eyebrow. And so you can see that the eyebrow, so my, or my character, this character, has got a big nose like me, but the eyes aren't terribly inset, but we're seeing that dark shadow there. Now, um, this is kind of loosely based on something photographers will call Rembrandt lighting, or painters will call Rembrandt lighting. And you can look that up on Google, and you can see pictures of what Rembrandt lighting will look like. And some of them tend to be really dark and dramatic, like some of Rembrandt's self-portraits. Now, in photography, studio photography, one of the things that the combination of the key and the fill will do is that the key will try to create this triangle of light on the subject's left cheek. And so you learn, as a photographer, you learn to look for that triangle of light. Um, and obviously the triangle is going to be different based on somebody's nose. If somebody's got a huge a very large nose, that triangle shape could be more pronounced. If somebody has a smaller nose, it might not be extremely visible at all. But we look for that triangle light, which is the combination of the shadow from the nose and also from the subject's left side of their face, or the photographer, the right camera right side of the face. So that's what the key light is doing. Then the fill light is putting in light in that area where the detail would get knocked out. So it's adding enough light in there to put in detail. And so you can see that on this side of the face, the light's coming from the right side, camera right, so that there's no light hitting there, but then the fill light or the key light is actually putting the most light on that side of the subject. So this is just adding in that other light from this side. And then the last light is the rim light, and now we can see how it's hitting the hair. So this is kind of dark colored hair, and it's not speckly, shiny like a lot of human hair will be. And so it's not picking up those glints, but you can see, at least in this render, the light is lighting up the top of the head. It's kind of putting this like halo, touched by an angel light on it, a very dim touch by an angel. But basically, it's adding detail in the top of the head and the shoulders. Now, a lot of Rembrandt lighting, if you look online, will leave that out where there's no light coming from the back. And so you could say that this is portrait lighting, bringing out the whole shape of the head. You don't want it to be too bright because you don't want it to stand out too much from the background. And then so the background has got this kind of weird, muddy, brownish look to it. The background color is darker than in the previous examples, and the lights are mixing to get various colors. Over here, it's more magenta because it's getting the blue from the rim and the red from the fill or the key. And over here, it's turning more cyan, where it's getting the green from the fill light and the blue from the rim. And so it's mixing on the background as well. Let's look at that. So here we see the red key light, the green fill light, and the blue. And over here we see it, the full shot. And I like making these lights so that I mean, I could put these lights way far back, but I wouldn't get the shadow on the wall, and it wouldn't look like a studio light. Because if the lights are further back, that shape of the shadow is going to be smaller, because the further back the light is, the closer the light is to the subject, the more it exaggerates the shadow, and um, and so you get that photography studio light, and then the camera, which we don't see, is would be sitting right there, and then this right side of the camera would be right there. So now let's look at the Houdini file to see our camera. So I'm going to go to the stage right camera, and then I'm going to turn on my camera. And my cameras, I don't like it that Houdini gives me that blue color, which is the same as um, uh, the it's hard to see which cameras are turned on, which cameras are turned off. But if I turn on the portrait camera there, I guess I got all the cameras turned on now. We can see that that's the position of the light. If I go to the so portrait, that's that portrait camera. And if I go to back to the right and I zoom out, then this is my full body camera, and then this one is my front view camera. So the front camera is kind of like someone standing in the back of the studio and sees everything. The uh, full body is if the camera was backed up enough to get the full body in there. And then I have my balcony light camera, which is just up there to get that top down view, and then my right side. And so these cameras, unless you have a really large studio, um, uh, like a big product studio where you would bring in cars and trucks, or a film set. In a film set studio, you probably would have room for cameras that further away, but in a photographer's portrait studio or a small product studio, you wouldn't necessarily have that much space. So they're more cameras using for showing what I'm showing you. Okay, and so now let's talk about the lenses for the cameras a little bit. Um, this is a good file to do that in. So I'm going to go back to my full body camera. We'll start there, and I'm going to turn off my camera displays so they don't show up. So in the portrait camera, I set the lens to be, or I'm sorry, full body camera. I set the lens to be 50 millimeters, which is kind of considered a correct perspective human view camera. And this is what I grew up. I've heard variations on this from different people. Some people say that the normal camera, human view camera is a 35, and a 35 might be true for the width of what we see. Like when I look forward with my, I guess I have pretty much normal vision. The left and right top and bottom that I see is what a 35 millimeter camera will give you. But the 35 millimeter lens on a 35 millimeter camera, which is the standard it's kind of used for movie cameras and the modern digital camera, 35 millimeter is slightly wide and will give you a little bit of lens distortion, whereas a 50 millimeter lens shows less but gives you less lens distortion. Now, computer graphics cameras typically give no distortion. You have to actually force it to have distortion. Now, if I set this from 50 to 35, we can see the difference. So it's wider, and it's wide enough to get that fill light in. So that fill light you can see is actually in front of that camera, front of the full body length camera. But then if I put it back to 50 or 55, or some people even say 60 for the non-distorted lens. I have a Nikon macro lens, which is uh, good for like super close-ups and shots without distortions, and that's a 60. So, but if you buy a normal Nikon camera with the standard lens, I think it's a 50 millimeter. Um, and my dad had Pentax, Rolex, no, not Rolex camera. Rollies were 120. Uh, so that another subject that I just want to mention is that different cameras with different film size, like a Rolleiflex or a Hasselblad camera, use 120 film, which has a really big piece of film on it. And the digital versions have giant backs, and so like a lots of resolution. And so the modern version of the Hasselblads have always been kind of outrageously expensive cameras, but they shot a bigger piece of film. Their lenses were bigger. The mechanics are probably more complicated in a 35 millimeter camera. And then the digital versions have a huge back and super high resolution in just area, let alone whatever the pixel resolution is. And so they're super expensive. And, you definitely should be a professional or have won the lottery to afford one of those. And so because the film back is bigger, then what's considered like a normal lens is different for that kind of camera. And so this is the whole science of lenses. And so when I'm talking about lenses, I'm talking about 35 millimeter film camera backs, which the modern digital era has kind of adopted for like the high end Nikon's, high end Canon, and also the uh, professional movie cameras like the Red and the Airfix. So anyway, uh, so you can see that even by my talking here with photography, there's so much of photography that's built into computer graphics, where computer graphics is emulating photography, which is good, which makes us being able to put a live action background and a 3D render together, and so that things will match. And so Especially if we're working to scale and you have lights in a real studio. Let's say you take a picture, then you have a 3D object that you're going to put over that background, and you put the lights in the same positions physically, put the camera in the same position. You're using the same kind of lens inside your 3D camera as you're using inside your real camera, and the light positions are all exactly the same. Then, therefore, you will get something that would look very close together. And then, I mean, naturally, you have to tweak because there's all these kind of variations between physical things and computer things. But it gets you in the ballpark. Okay, so that's my three lights that I have set up. I do have a environment light, and in some of these I set the intensity to 0. So even though the light is there, it's actually supplying no contribution to the set. Um, and my background shader that I put on here, I gave it a really dark color. So for that one, and so that's my basic setup. Let's just go in and double check to see how tall Lewis is. So if I click on their information button, he's 1.8 meters high, and then his eye position. I'm going to turn this W, and I'm going to turn this geogrid ground, and then my camera for my full body camera hits set at 1.6, and so it's about the eye height or maybe nose height of Lewis, and so the photographer's eyesight, this 1.6, is about the same eye height as Lewis would be. And something about perspective. Now, if I'm going to go into this geo ground, and if I temporary scale this on the top layer, and we get this to be huge. My background, my lens is clipping actually. Where's my camera full body, my view, my clipping? Uh, okay, so the background here, this one, uh, this is the height of the camera, and so it's actually like the height of the camera is like somewhere between his around his mouth, and so with the horizon, which is as far away as you can get, uh, on the background, before the Earth curves, there's no mountains, and that's the same height as the camera, the photographer or the painter, his point of view. And so if my camera height is exactly the same as the eyes of the subject, that background horizon would be up just a little bit where Lewis would be. And so if I were to take that height, and I'm not going to save this file, and if I just raise it a little bit, too much. So then now the horizon, I'm looking at the tops of his ears. Um, that height would be the uh, height of his eyes, and so it's close. So anyway, in what I just showed you, I talked a lot about a lot of different things the photographer has to worry about. I'm going to turn off that ground layer, and it's my backdrop layer, and so. Trying to match a real studio, and this red, green, and blue light helps isolate which colors do what. Uh, and I'll move on to the next file.